the late 1990s, a team of credentialed scientists, people with PhD, federal clearance, and reputations to protect, stood on a quiet ranch in northeastern Utah and saw something they could not explain. Their instruments worked. Their data was real. But what they witnessed that night violated the rules of physics, biology, and frankly, common sense. One scientist wrote in his notes, "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'd call myself a liar." And that's where this story gets uncomfortable. Because this wasn't the work of conspiracy theorists or ghost hunters. It was a 10-year government-funded investigation into a place so bizarre, even the skeptics stopped laughing. You see, most so-called paranormal locations collapse under scientific testing. Cameras glitch, witnesses contradict, and eventually someone admits it was a hoax. But this one didn't. Instead, every time the scientists thought they had debunked something, the ranch responded, almost intelligently, as if whatever was there didn't want to prove itself real. It just wanted them to know it was watching. Over 500 acres of red sand desert, miles from civilization, filled with mutilated cattle, glowing skies, invisible predators, and a scent that witnesses still describe as metallic and rotten at the same time. And the strangest part? It was documented. Photos, logs, radio scans, radiation readings. All of it filed by people who spent their lives disproving things like this. So how did a respectable team of researchers go from studying weather patterns to chasing shapeshifters, portals, and UFOs? Well, before we get into that, if you're a fan of stories that are strange, dark, and mysterious, told in story format, you're in the right place, because that's literally all I do here. So before we begin, walk the like button out into the desert and offer it a cup of decaf coffee. If you hear it whisper your name on the wind, just keep walking. Also subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss whatever that was. Okay, let's rewind. Long before the scientists showed up, before the government started writing checks, before the world had even heard the name Skinwalker Ranch, this land already had a reputation. The locals called it cursed. The Navajo called it sacred. And anyone who dared to live there learned the hard way that the stories weren't stories at all. This is the story of Skinwalker Ranch. To understand why scientists called this ranch cursed, you have to go back more than a century. Long before the fences, before the cattle, before anyone called it Skinwalker Ranch. Back then, this corner of northeastern Utah wasn't owned by any one family. It was a borderland, the uneasy line between two Native American tribes, the Ute and the Navajo, and between them was blood. According to Ute oral history, the Navajo placed a powerful curse on the land after a brutal conflict. The Ute had been capturing Navajo people and selling them into slavery to early settlers and the U.S. government. In return, the Navajo called upon their darkest medicine men, known as Ye-Nal-Lushi, or as we know them, skinwalkers. A skinwalker isn't your average ghost story. It's not a spirit or a demon. It's a witch, a human who's crossed a sacred line, trading their humanity for the ability to become something else, an animal, a shadow, a voice in the dark. But there's a catch. They don't just wear the shape of these creatures. They wear the skin. Legends say the skinwalkers were sent to patrol the cursed land, not to kill everyone who entered, but to torment them, to make sure the Ute never felt safe here again. And if you believe the stories, they succeeded. The Ute avoided that patch of desert for generations, calling it the path of the skinwalker. They said the land itself had eyes, that fires burned without smoke, voices echoed with no source, and the animals weren't always animals. So when settlers finally moved in, building a ranch right on top of this so-called cursed ground, the locals didn't say congratulations. They said, don't stay there after dark. But of course, they did. And by the time the Sherman family arrived in 1994, The curse wasn't folklore anymore. It was waiting. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman thought they had struck gold. After years of saving, they finally found it. A 500-acre ranch tucked in the red deserts of northeastern Utah. Wide open land for their prized cattle, untouched wilderness, and a house sitting perfectly in the middle of it all. It was everything they'd dreamed of. The price? Way below market value, which, to most buyers, would sound suspicious. To the Shermans, it just sounded lucky. But from the moment they stepped out of their truck, things felt off. The air was too still. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just silence. When they unlocked the front door, they found something even stranger. Every single door, not just the front, not just the back, every door inside the house, had deadbolts on both sides, meaning you could lock someone in or out. The windows were sealed with thick iron bars, and in the dirt outside, heavy metal stakes with thick chains, the kind you'd use for dogs. Except whatever had been chained here wasn't small. Still, Terry brushed it off. Rural folks get paranoid, right? Maybe the last owners were just being cautious. So, the family got to work unloading boxes, laughing, settling in, until Terry looked out toward the tree line. There, in the distance, something was moving. Big, slow, confident. At first he thought it was a dog. Then it came closer and kept coming. It was a wolf, but not like any wolf he'd ever seen. It was massive, shoulder high to a grown man, its fur gray and soaked from rain, eyes bright and intelligent. And instead of running, it walked straight up to them. Calm, tail wagging. Gwen's father even reached out and petted it. Then as quickly as it appeared friendly, it lunged. The wolf clamped its jaws around a calf's head and wouldn't let go. Terry grabbed his rifle and fired. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The bullets hit. But the wolf didn't bleed, didn't flinch. It just looked back at them, almost curious, then turned and trotted away into the trees. When they followed its tracks into the mud, the prints just stopped. The wolf was gone, and so was their sense of safety. After the encounter with the unkillable wolf, the Shermans tried to convince themselves it was a fluke. A weird story for the neighbors. But that illusion didn't last long, because almost immediately, the ranch began fighting back. It started small. Terry would set down a heavy post-hole digger, a 70-pound tool, walk inside for lunch and come back to find it gone. Days later, he'd discover it hanging 40 feet up in a cottonwood tree. Groceries they'd just unpacked would somehow repack themselves neatly in bags. A towel Gwen hung in the bathroom vanished, only to reappear folded in a closet across the house. At first they thought they were losing their minds. Then came the lights. Every night, glowing orbs began drifting across the property, hovering just above the ground like lazy fireflies, except too big, too bright, too intelligent. Sometimes they'd hover near the cattle pens. Other nights, they'd follow the family truck home from the fields, then vanish the moment anyone looked directly at them. Then, the mutilations began. One morning, Terry found one of his best calves lying in the field, its hide peeled back with surgical precision. No blood, no tracks, no sign of struggle. Just a smell. Metallic, chemical, wrong. The same smell from the day the wolf appeared. Soon, the family began hearing voices, low, murmuring, speaking in a language no one recognized. They came from the fields, from the trees, from inside the walls. And on the nights, the voices came. So did the blue lights. Floating spheres that gave off no sound, but made everyone who saw them feel sudden, crushing panic. Even the dogs refused to go near them. The Shermans barely slept. Gwen lost her job. The kids were failing school. By spring, the family was living in constant fear, locking every door, every window, listening to the quiet between the knocks. And deep down, they knew the ranch wasn't just haunted. It was watching them. By 1996, the Shermans had reached their breaking point. They'd stopped sleeping, their cattle were disappearing, and every night they heard things. Voices, footsteps, machinery, just beyond the edge of the light. So, when a Las Vegas billionaire named Robert Bigelow called, they didn't hesitate. Bigelow wasn't just any rich guy. He was obsessed with the unknown. He'd founded a private research group, the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, dedicated to studying what he called high strangeness. When he heard about the ranch, he didn't laugh. He bought it. Within weeks, a team of scientists, engineers, and former military researchers moved in. Their job was simple: prove, once and for all, whether the stories were real or just a family's imagination running wild. They set up everything: motion sensors, night vision cameras, radiation meters, even cattle trackers. The scientists weren't believers. They were skeptics. They were the kind of people who needed data, not ghost stories. But that first week, something strange happened. Every camera on the east side of the property went offline, all at once. When the team checked the lines, they found every cable ripped out of the poles. Perfectly clean cuts, as if by surgical tools. The kicker? The cameras facing those poles had also been destroyed. No footage, no evidence, just silence. Over the next year, they documented glowing spheres, cattle mutilations, magnetic fields that bent compasses, and dark, humanoid shapes moving along the ridges. Every time they tried to measure it, radiation spikes, EM fields, heat sensors, the readings would distort, then reset to zero, as if something knew they were watching and was watching back. The scientists had come to disprove the supernatural, but what they found at Skinwalker Ranch didn't just challenge science. It mocked it. The scientists expected stories. What they didn't expect was data they couldn't explain. Within weeks of setting up their equipment, strange readings began pouring in. Magnetic fields around the ranch would suddenly spike, bending instruments, twisting compasses so violently they spun in circles. Cameras aimed at the fields would glitch for seconds, then come back online to show nothing. But the real nightmare began when they used infrared. One night, 2 researchers were positioned on a ridge, scanning the open fields through thermal goggles. Everything looked normal. The barns, the cattle, the fences glowing in faint reds and oranges. Then, something appeared. A cold mass, darker than anything around it, crawling out of midair, like it was stepping through a doorway only it could see. They watched it drop onto the ground and sprint silently into the hills. No sound, no tracks, no explanation. Another night, a veterinarian found a calf, healthy the day before, lying in the pasture, dissected with surgical precision. The skin peeled back neatly. No blood, no footprints anywhere near the body. The cut lines were cleaner than anything a knife could make. It was as if something had taken the animal apart, without ever touching it. The team documented everything. Photos, radiation data, EM readings, and yet every proof raised more questions than answers. In one experiment, they buried magnetic sensors across the ranch. Hours later, one sensor recorded a burst of energy strong enough to knock out nearby electronics, while the others, just inches away, detected nothing. It was as if the energy targeted specific spots, specific moments, and ignored everything else. They tried to chase it. They tried to measure it. But every time they got close, the phenomenon changed. adapting, hiding, almost playing with them. And that's when one of the researchers wrote in his logbook, "We're not observing it, it's observing us." Whatever was haunting the Shermans hadn't gone away. It had just found a new audience. It was late one night in 1997 when two of the NIDE's researchers set up camp on a ridge overlooking the ranch. They had night vision scopes, cameras, sensors, everything a skeptic could want to debunk a myth. But what they saw that night didn't need debunking. It needed an exorcism. Around 2 a.m., one of the men spotted a light, a glowing orange sphere hovering about 100 yards from the ground. At first, they thought it was just another orb, until one of them switched to infrared. Through the thermal scope, the orange light wasn't just a light. It was a hole, an oval-shaped opening, hanging in the air like someone had torn a doorway through the night. And inside that doorway was daylight. Both men froze. They could see a blue sky through it, clouds drifting. And then something moved. A dark, humanoid figure crawled out, slowly, unnaturally, like gravity didn't apply to it. When it hit the ground, it didn't land. It flowed. Long limbs, no visible face, blacker than shadow. The creature sprinted toward the ridge, its footsteps crunching through the shale, yet making no echo at all. One researcher whispered, "Are you seeing this?" The other couldn't answer. He was too busy recording the infrared footage, hands shaking. The creature passed within 30 feet of them, close enough that the men could smell it, the same metallic rotten scent the Shermans had described years earlier. Then it was gone. The portal snapped shut, the night returned to stillness, and both men sat frozen, unable to speak. When they reviewed the footage later, they realized something even stranger. On normal cameras, nothing. No light, no figure, no distortion. Only the infrared captured it, as if the thing existed just outside visible reality. That encounter became the most famous piece of evidence from Skinwalker Ranch. But it wasn't proof. Because what do you call proof when science itself refuses to recognize what you saw? After the night of the portal, everything changed. The NIDS scientists were shaken. They'd spent years chasing data, electromagnetic spikes, mutilated cattle, glowing spheres, and finally, they'd seen something that defied every model of reality they knew. But just when they were closest to understanding it, the ranch went quiet. Over the next year, activity dropped to almost nothing. The orbs stopped appearing, the instruments flatlined, and even the animals seemed calmer. It was as if whatever intelligence haunted that place had simply lost interest. Or worse, it had finished. By 2004, the research abruptly ended. The official statement said the project was being suspended for lack of consistent evidence. But those inside the program told a different story. Hard drives were removed overnight. Footage was boxed, sealed, and shipped to undisclosed storage facilities. And the scientists, the same ones who'd sworn to publish their findings, signed fresh non-disclosure agreements so strict they couldn't even acknowledge they'd been there. The ranch was sold again. New owner, new name, new security fences topped with barbed wire. Visitors were banned. Satellite images blurred the property lines. And anyone who tried to investigate got a phone call telling them to stop. Some said the government took over. Others believed Bigelow's team discovered something humanity wasn't ready to face. And a few whispered that it wasn't a discovery at all. It was a warning. Today, the gates of Skinwalker Ranch remain locked. Motion sensors line the perimeter. The land looks quiet, harmless, almost peaceful. But those who worked there still refused to talk about what they saw. Maybe because they were told not to. Or maybe because deep down, they know that whatever's out there is still watching, waiting for someone else to open the door. Even scientists who swore off the supernatural left this place believing something was there. Not ghosts, not aliens. Something that watched, learned, and played by rules we don't understand. Years later, when reporters asked members of the NIDS team what they thought had caused the events at Skinwalker Ranch, most refused to answer. One quietly said, "It was intelligent. It knew us before we knew it." Another simply said, "Whatever it was, it's still there." You can go online right now and find dozens of theories. Some say it was all psychological, mass hysteria fueled by isolation. Others claim government experiments were testing new technology in the desert. But then you realize something strange. Every time someone gets close to proving it's a hoax, new activity starts, new witnesses appear, and the ranch changes hands again. Today, that same stretch of desert still hums with energy. Private security patrols the gates, unmarked helicopters sweep overhead, and thermal cameras, the kind that only governments can afford, watch the land 24/7 for a place that supposedly had nothing left to study. It's oddly well protected. So what was Skinwalker Ranch really? A testing ground for advanced weapons? A doorway between worlds? Or just the collective fear of people staring too long into the dark? Maybe it was all of those things. Or maybe the land itself remembers. A curse that started in blood, adapted through belief, and now hides behind government gates and scientific jargon, waiting for someone new to wander in, curious enough to wake it up again. So if this was all a hoax, why is the government still guarding the ranch?